Zarkellan High Inquisitor Zeltrax stood at the observation deck of the Varix Prime training grounds, his mandibles twitching with a mix of anticipation and superiority. Before him, nestled within a containment dome, stretched the most meticulously reconstructed simulation of Deathworld 7, an infamous class, 9 hazard zone infamous for vaporous predators, neurotoxic flora, and topographic instability. The training grounds were the pride of the Zarkellan Ascendancy. It was here they forged the galaxy's toughest elite, except, of course, for humans, who were barely above decorative primates on the evolutionary scoreboard. Place the new recruits into Drop Cluster Theta, Zeltrax ordered. His voice clicked with authority. We'll separate the Nargathi twins from the Quill Beast to avoid another incident. An aide hesitated. And the human Inquisitor? Zeltrax narrowed 4 of his 6 eyes. The what? Designation, human. From Earth. Here on Diplomatic Exchange Protocol 492. Species considered class 4 minor lethal. Likely to perish within the first 6 hours. Shall we exclude him? Zeltrax's laugh was like dry bones scraping steel. Let him in. Every cohort needs comic relief. Elsewhere in the prep bay, Corporal Mason Briggs flexed a shoulder, rotating a crick loose from the scarred joint. His military-issued undersuit stretched taut across muscle and burn-scarred skin. Around him, beings of all shapes and biologies were checking gear, whispering translations of warning labels, and, judging by the 3-eyed squid thing retching nearby, regretting breakfast. A sleek blue form approached him, armor gleaming with fresh nanosheen. "You are the human, yes?" it asked, its translator implant giving the words a musical cadence. "Last time I checked," Mason said, tying off a length of rope that wasn't included in the standard kit. He had scavenged it from a dangling support beam, because instincts honed in war zones and rescue missions told him survival meant using what you had, not what was approved. "I am Yelektar of the Drenari. Do you understand this simulation's danger?" "I've been through worse," Mason said. He smiled faintly, thinking of his second tour in Earth's Amazon conflict zones. The jungle had hissed at him for 2 weeks straight. This would be no different. Less malaria, hopefully. The pod bay lights shifted to orange. All participants, prepare for drop. Yelektar's gills flared nervously. "I hear Deathworld. 7 eats souls." Mason snorted. "So does Detroit." He strapped in, pulling tight the restraints as the pod hissed shut around him. Lights flickered. A low tremor vibrated through the seat as the Simcore engaged. In moments, his body was falling. Artificial gravity simulating entry to a hostile atmosphere, fire and turbulence hissing against invisible shielding. Then came the crash. The door exploded open, releasing him into a choking green mist. The air tasted metallic. The sky glowed with sickly twin suns, half-shrouded in storm. Something skittered across the underbrush. The training AI whispered warnings in 10 languages. Mason ignored them all. He crouched low, scanning his surroundings. Jungle. Dense. Sweltering. Predator-level sounds already in stereo. He grinned. "Just like Fort Whitaker," he muttered. Back on the observation deck, Instructor Zeltrax monitored the trainees' vitals. The Jakari were already down to 70% stamina. One of the crystalline Marvulians was vibrating out of stress. The Nargathi twins were arguing about whether their limb count had decreased. Then there was the human. Zeltrax clicked. The human's vitals are stable, even elevated in excitement. "Should we activate mitigation protocols?" the aide asked.
"No."
"Let the sim run." Maybe he's confused. Or mad. Mason was neither. Within an hour, he had constructed a lean-to out of bark he'd punched off a tree. He recognized the signs of predatory pollen. He'd once slept next to a landmine flower in Borneo. This was the same game, different rules. But he played to win. He set a fire using friction, a shard of his visor, and a dry, fibrous root. He boiled water in a carved rock basin. He even cooked something that vaguely resembled a snake-rabbit hybrid. It had tried to bite him first. Yelektar stumbled into his camp around sunset, covered in blue mucus, eyes wild. "You're still alive," the Drenari gasped. The instructor said, Half the cohort was neutralized by acidic fungi. Fungus only gets you if you breathe through your mouth and run like a panicked goat, Mason said, handing over a skewer of meat. Try this. Tastes like regret. Yelektar stared at the food, confused. You cooked it? Raw meats for people with better health insurance. Above, Zeltrax leaned forward, antennae twitching. He built a fire. In a simulation tuned for chaos frequencies and random threat generation. A secondary observer spoke up. He also caught and processed a forelag. It's considered a biohazard in 12 sectors. Zeltrax hissed. This isn't possible. Then the human looked up at one of the camp's observation drones. And winked. In that moment, something shifted, not in the jungle, but in the Zarkellan psyche. Zeltrax folded his limbs behind his back and murmured, "Let's see how long he lasts." Down in the simulation, Mason leaned back against a tree and watched the two moons rise over deadly terrain. He wasn't worried. This place was loud, smelly, full of things that wanted to kill you, and worst of all, poorly organized. Still easier than Thanksgiving with his in-laws. He smiled. This was going to be fun. Yelektar had never seen a creature eat while grinning. In Drenari culture, showing teeth during a meal was considered a declaration of war. Yet here was the human, Corporal Mason Briggs, bearing his entire mouthful of carnivore tools while chewing on something that sizzled faintly with lingering toxins. "It's good protein," Mason said, gesturing to the impaled remains of what had once been a venom-backed tree crawler. "Tastes like scorpion, if scorpions had a barbecue pit and anger management issues." Yelektar sat cross-legged, still trembling from his earlier sprint through the spore veil. His gill membranes were torn, and he'd lost most of his environmental wraps. He watched Mason wrap the roasted meat in a thick leaf, then hand it over. "I thought humans were low tier. Your species is barely above galactic standard in cognitive processing." "Yeah," Mason said, poking the fire. "We're real dumb. Built AI before we figured out universal healthcare. We also thought deep-frying cheese was a good idea." Yelektar blinked. "You survived the spore veil. And the heat spores. And that thing with the tendrils that hissed in binary." "Oh, that was new," Mason admitted. "But it bled. That's usually a good sign." Somewhere behind them, something howled, long and warbling, like a siren buried in sand. Yelektar shivered. Mason didn't flinch. He tossed another branch into the fire, leaned back, and scratched a bug bite that had developed a second set of legs. Above them, Instructor Zeltrax's patience was eroding. "The human zone has shown an 84% drop in threat activity," one of the analysts reported. "Creatures are actively avoiding his camp." "That's not possible," Zeltrax hissed. "Recalculate." The analyst hesitated. "There's a pattern emerging. The human sets traps, then eats what he catches, then uses the remains to bait more predators. Predators that are now extinct in that quadrant," another murmured. Zeltrax rotated his mandibles slowly, as if tasting failure. Back in the jungle, Mason tied a vine across two trees, then bent a branch back and locked it with a wedge of stone. Yelektar pointed a trembling claw. That's a snare trap." "Yup. We were never taught those." "Nope. Why do you know it?" Mason paused. "Because my grandpa once said, if the world wants to kill you, charge rent." Yelektar didn't understand the phrase, but the reverence in Mason's voice made him stay quiet. The simulation intensified after nightfall. Acidic rain fell in diagonal slashes. Thermal blooms destabilized the air. A screechabat dive-bombed the shelter, only to get caught in the tripwire and explode in a puff of luminous feathers. 3 alien cadets, soaked and wheezing, stumbled into the clearing. One was missing part of an appendage, another held a melted comms unit, useless. Mason didn't ask questions. He handed out strips of roasted meat, pointed them to dry areas, and passed around a cracked container filled with hot, leaf-infused water. The others stared at the steam, confused. "Tea," Mason explained. "For shock." One of the cadets, a reptilian Oscary, finally spoke. "You are not what we expected." Mason stirred the fire with a stick. You expected some soft-shelled tourist who panics when something hisses at him? No offense. None taken, Mason said. You've probably never had to detick a friend with a hot knife or fight off a raccoon with a crowbar. Earth's not gentle. But it's only rated class 4, Yellochtar insisted. Your climate barely ranks as semi-lethal. Mason laughed, low and grim.
Yeah, well.
That rating's based on averages, not the bits where nature goes full murder happy. Ever heard of Australia? Silence. Mason leaned in. Let me tell you a story. We've got islands where spiders can swim, birds mimic crying infants to lure prey, and platypuses have venomous ankle spikes. That's just the cute stuff. The alien stared. And we live there, Mason finished. Built cities there. Threw barbecues there. The fire crackled. Zeltrax listened to the live audio feed, unmoving. He could hear the reverence in the cadets' voices. He could hear learning. And it wasn't coming from his curriculum. Shut down the feed to their helmets, he ordered. But the tech shrugged helplessly. They're not on our channel. They're on the human's frequency.
How?
He built his own comm relay. From rocks, a melted sensor node, and a discarded chest plate. Zeltrax's mandibles twitched erratically. In the simulation, a tremor rattled the camp. Trees shifted unnaturally, and distant cries grew louder. Something big's coming, Yellochtar whispered. Good, Mason said, standing. He slung a sharpened branch over one shoulder like a rifle. We're almost out of meat. You're not serious. Mason was already walking toward the tree line, humming an old military cadence. Behind him, the alien stared in awe, unsure whether to follow or pray. Yellochtar rose to his feet, hesitating. Are you coming? Mason asked without turning. I think I am. The Drenari followed, pulse racing, eyes wide. Above them, storm clouds bloomed like ink in water. Behind them, the fire flickered and waited. The clearing had become a war zone. Charred vines sizzled where Mason's improvised napalm trap had detonated. Cratered mud steamed. The shattered husk of a thunder lizard lay in pieces, its bioelectric sacs still twitching from residual discharge. Around it, cadets huddled in Mason's reinforced shelter, now boasting a smoke chimney, drainage trench, and crude spears fashioned from armor shards. Mason crouched beside the carcass, knife in one hand, a length of cable in the other.
He was humming again.
Something ancient, bluesy, mournful. You killed it, Yellochtar whispered, voice shaking. No, Mason corrected, sawing through the beast's muscle. We did. You drew it into the blind spot. Jick from Team 6 tripped the lure switch. All I did was make it bleed in the right direction. The Oscary cadet shivered, staring at the puddle of steaming blood. I watched 2 command instructors flee from one of those last year. You didn't even scream. Didn't have time, Mason muttered, twisting out a venom sac the size of a football. Screaming doesn't fix the problem. Above them, the observation chamber was in chaos. Zeltrax's fingers danced over controls, antennae quivering with disbelief. Every scenario had been pushed beyond maximum thresholds. Environmental instability, hostile density, mutation rate. He dialed them all to 11. And yet Mason Briggs still lived. Worse, he thrived. Aid drones floated silently behind Zeltrax, data streaming in jagged red lines. Cadet vitals were steady. Survival probability for the entire group had risen since entering the deadliest phase of the simulation. The Zarkellan survival matrix flagged this outcome as statistically implausible. Pull him out, Zeltrax hissed. Initiate heart extraction. No response. A technician replied nervously. Human comm signature is jamming the override signal. He's jamming us now. With a signal repeater made from fungus, thermite gel, and, I believe, part of a ration can. Zeltrax slammed a clawed fist into the console. I want a council envoy.
Now.
If this is sabotage. It's not, came a voice behind him. The chamber fell silent as a new figure strode in, 4 meters tall, obsidian-skinned, clad in the flowing insignia of the Galactic Survey Corps. Ambassador VRRZ tilted her head, clicking softly. Earth was reclassified 100 years ago. Zarkellan archives appear outdated. Zeltrax stiffened. Reclassified? Earth? It was rated class 4. Correct, VRRZ said. Then someone updated it after the incident at Redstone Gulf. Earth is now class 12. On par with Gravis Prime and Blood Reef 9. No species survives class 12 worlds unaided. They don't, VRRZ said. Except humans. Zeltrax's faceplates twitched. Why were we not informed, he demanded. We assumed no one would try to enroll a human in Deathworld training. She gestured at the simulation feed. Apparently, we were wrong. Back in the jungle, Mason finished binding the venom sac to a hollowed root tube and duct-taped the trigger mechanism from his broken compad. Trap? Yeliktar asked. Nope. Mason grinned. Launcher. He slung the crude biocannon over his shoulder and turned toward the horizon, where thunder clouds crawled with winged shadows. Big swarm coming, Mason said. Time to move. One of the crystalline cadets, glowing faintly with stress fractures, spoke up. You're not afraid, are you? Mason paused. Yeah, he said, finally. Always am. That silenced them. Fear's normal, he added, adjusting the strap. Means you care about what comes next. But panic? That's what gets people killed. The cadets nodded, slowly, like acolytes before a prophet. The ground shook. The canopy trembled with chittering shrieks. Mason looked around at the aliens, the misfits, the nervous, the barely surviving, and felt a strange twist in his chest. Pride, maybe. Something heavier. You don't have to follow me, he said. This isn't part of your test anymore. Yeliktar stepped forward first. You saved me. Taught me how to live. I will follow. One by one, the others did the same. No salute. No fanfare. Just resolve. A wind howled through the trees, carrying the stench of acid and wings. Mason cocked the launcher. All right, he muttered. Let's show this planet what a bad idea looks like. The final swarm descended like a black wave, and the cadets charged into it, led by a man from a world no one had bothered to understand. An hour later, the simulation ended. When the doors opened and the cadets stumbled out, bleeding and exhilarated and very much alive, the viewing gallery was silent. Mason walked last, arms scratched, armor dented, and the broken remains of the biocannon slung over one shoulder like a trophy. He stopped beside Zeltrax, looked up at the instructor with sun-cracked eyes, and said, You might want to update your training material. Zeltrax said nothing. He couldn't. VRRZ approached him, a smile on her mandibles. Mr. Briggs, how would you feel about teaching a class? Mason considered it, then grinned.
Sure.
I'll need a fire pit, a whiteboard, and a cup of decent coffee. Behind him, the cadets cheered. From that day forward, the most elite Deathworld survival course in the galaxy had a new name. Surviving Earth 101.